Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really going back in time, digging into the roots of a movement that honestly was built on a pretty startling idea.
Yeah, the idea that hitting rock bottom, absolute defeat, could actually be the start of something completely new.
Exactly. We're looking at the original source material, the stories from the very beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous, those moments of connection, the intellectual wrestling matches.
And the spiritual insights that somehow bubbled up and grew from just a few people feeling utterly hopeless into this huge global thing.
So this isn't just a history recap, right?
No, not at all. Think of it more like digging into a philosophy as it was being born. We see the 12 steps now as this, established thing.
Hmm.
But our goal here is to uncover the messy bits, the specific details of how they actually put those principles together. How did these people, facing what looked like total despair, manage to blend spiritual ideas with practical psychology?
To create something that actually worked and could be repeated.
Precisely. A framework for lasting change, built from scratch, really.
And when you dive into those early writings, the core idea, it just seems backward.
Utterly counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole movement finds its strength, its foundation, not through some strong leader or, power structure,
Mhm.
but through this shared experience of just complete failure, utter defeat. That's the paradox we need to unpack, I think.
You've hit it exactly. The sources are incredibly upfront about this. They basically say, look, nothing good happens for someone struggling until they first accept their, and this is their phrase, devastating weakness and all its consequences.
Devastating weakness. Wow.
And you mentioned utter defeat. They define that as accepting absolute helplessness.
Okay, but hold on. Isn't there a danger there?
Yeah.
Like if you push that too far, accepting you're powerless,
Mm.
doesn't that just lead to giving up? To apathy?
That's the key distinction, isn't it?
It sounds like you're saying surrender is the path to strength,
Right.
which feels wrong.
It is surrender, but it's very specific. It's the surrender of self-will. The way they saw it, the person caught in active alcoholism is driven by this obsessive self-will, this need for control, always trying to uh, bombard our problems with sheer willpower, as they put it.
Right, trying to force a solution.
And when that inevitably fails, again and again, the sources say you have to fully accept that I cannot save myself. That moment, that realization of your own limits, that humility, that's what paradoxically opens the door
Opens the door to what, though?
to strength. Whether you define that strength as a higher power, like they often did, or simply the shared support, the collective energy of the group, that moment of feeling absolutely helpless is, weirdly enough, the first real step towards getting free.
Okay, that really sets the scene for how this whole thing started. Before they could write down the philosophy, they needed that initial spark, right? That connection. How did it begin at the individual level? Let's start with Bill W.
Yeah, the whole thing really hangs on a few critical personal experiences.
Yeah.
Bill W.'s is maybe the most famous.
Yeah.
His glorious release, they call it.
Right, after years of just terrible struggle, fear, hopelessness, he has this sudden, almost, mystical moment. A profound calm washes over him.
And he had that thought.
Exactly. The thought was something like, no matter how wrong things seem to be, they are still all right. Things are all right with God and his world. It was instant, powerful, life-altering.
And crucially, this very personal, very spiritual feeling wasn't just left hanging there. It got grounded almost immediately by his doctor, Dr. Silkworth.
Yes, that was so important for validation. Bill W. himself worried he was losing his mind, maybe hallucinating.
Understandable.
But Silkworth saw the huge psychological shift and basically said, no, you're not crazy. You've had some basic psychological or spiritual event. He gave it a kind of rational framework.
Which must have been vital for Bill, especially given his background, right? He wasn't exactly Mr. Religious.
Not at all. He'd apparently sworn off churches for like 40 years, a real deep-seated resistance to organized religion. He wasn't looking for God. He was desperate for a way to stop dying from alcoholism. So if the solution wasn't coming from a church, where did they get the actual methods? The practical stuff came out of the Oxford group, didn't it? The first century Christian fellowship.
Yes, the Oxford group provided the initial toolkit, you could say. They were this spiritual movement trying to, as they put it, recapture the power of first century Christianity.
How? What did that look like in practice?
It was about radical honesty and applying spiritual principles to all parts of life. Their core method was based on what they called the four absolutes:
Okay, what were those?
absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. Pretty demanding standards.
Sounds incredibly rigorous.
Yeah.
How did those big ideas translate into what became the AA program?
They translated almost directly into the actions that later formed the core of the steps. Things like intense self-examination, confessing your character defects to another person.
That sounds like step 5.
Exactly. And making restitution for harms done, that's the basis for steps 8 and 9. The whole idea of rigorous self-inventory and surrendering your will to God's guidance came straight from that Oxford group environment.
But the real spark, the thing that actually kicked off AA as we know it,
Yeah.
was that meeting between Bill W. and Dr. Bob Smith. And that meeting only happened because of someone in the Oxford group.
Right, Henrietta Seiberling. She was the connector. She was part of the group in Akron, and she knew Dr. Bob was really struggling, hitting bottom. She believed Bill W. was the answer, the help she and others had been seeking for Bob.
So Bill goes to Akron in 1935. But he wasn't going just to be a good Samaritan, was he?
No, that's a crucial point. He went because, in his own words, he desperately needed another alcoholic. He'd already figured out that his own sobriety seemed to depend on trying to help someone else, on carrying the message.
Ah, so the service aspect wasn't just selfless charity. It was actually about his own survival.
Totally. It was built in self-preservation. So in that famous meeting, May 12, 1935, Bill didn't preach. He didn't give advice. He just talked.
Told his story.
Yeah, he just laid out the dreary but fascinating facts about himself. No judgment, no you shoulds or you musts, just pure, raw identification.
And Dr. Bob, he was apparently a pretty serious, no-nonsense kind of guy, probably skeptical about all the spiritual talk Bill had picked up. How did Bill break through that?
Bob was skeptical, definitely dismissive of the God talk initially. He was impressed by Bill's honesty, his seriousness, sure, but not the spiritual angle.
So what changed?
It was the story. As Bill described his own drinking, his failures, his feelings, Bob started seeing himself. He apparently kept thinking, maybe even muttered, yes, that's like me, that's just like me.
Ah, the identification.
That was it. Seeing his own hopeless condition mirrored in someone else, someone who wasn't drinking now and who was, respectable, a professional like himself, that's when Bob began to open his heart, as they say. That shared hopelessness, that connection, that was the moment AA really began.
And things started happening pretty fast after that, didn't they? By late 1937, they actually had some data.
Yeah, they could point to around 40 people who had achieved significant dry time, which was frankly astonishing back then, given how treatments usually failed. They knew they were onto something real, a chain reaction, Bill called it.
They weren't just stumbling in the dark anymore.
Exactly. They felt like they'd lit a beacon, and
Yeah.
now they needed to figure out how to keep it lit and, make it brighter.
And we should probably mention the wives here, too. Lois Wilson, Bill's wife, visiting Akron and connecting with Ann Smith, Dr. Bob's wife. That seems important.
Absolutely critical. Anne Smith was apparently just this rock, had a lot of wisdom and a wonderful insight into people. She became this crucial support for the other wives who were going through their own kind of hell.
Right.
That mutual support among the families laid the groundwork for what would eventually become Al-Anon. It showed early on that this wasn't just about the alcoholic, it affected the whole family.
It's interesting, though, even with that early success together, the Akron AA group eventually split off from the main Oxford group.
Right.
They started meeting at Dr. Bob's house by late 1939. Did they ditch the Oxford principles then?
Not really, no. The Akron group, which was the first big cluster, actually held on to a more intensely spiritual focus compared to the New York group, which maybe leaned a bit more psychological or practical.
Huh.
In fact, folks in Akron kept using the Oxford group's four absolutes: honesty, purity, unselfishness, love as kind of like personal guidelines for a long time after the official separation. Shows how deep that early influence went.
Okay, so the groups are starting to form. They're having success. But then comes the huge challenge. How do you bottle this? How do you share it beyond just Akron and New York? This brings us to the big book, right? And the whole mess around money.
Exactly. The big book, the book actually titled Alcoholics Anonymous, was absolutely essential for spreading the message. Bill W. basically wrote the first big chunk of it, those first 11 chapters. He was trying to capture what they were doing, what they believed, how it seemed to work.
And the book itself became a tool for recovery.
Yeah, that was the genius of it. They discovered that some people, totally isolated, maybe out on a farm somewhere, could just read the book and get sober. It created this way to pass on the help without needing a physical meeting right away.
And it wasn't just aimed at anyone, was it? There was a specific audience in mind.
Oh, definitely. They were consciously trying to reach, well, respectable folks, educated middle-class people. They wanted to break that stereotype of the alcoholic as just some skid row bum.
Why was that so important?
Because they knew if successful doctors, lawyers, business people thought, oh, that program's not for people like me, they'd never get the help they needed. So the stories in the book often feature these high-functioning types who still hit utter despair.
Makes sense. But trying to get this book published and just generally get organized ran smack into a massive money problem, the famous Rockefeller dinner. Sounds like they almost crashed and burned right there.
It was a genuine crisis, yeah. Bill and Bob knew they needed cash to set up some kind of central office, coordinate things, get the book out there. So they arranged this dinner, got some very wealthy, powerful New York capitalists to come.
Hoping for a big donation, an endowment.
Exactly. They had respected figures speak, like Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, Dr. Foster Kennedy, praising the work AA was doing.
And then Nelson Rockefeller gets up to speak for his father, John D. Rockefeller, Jr., who was ill. And this is the moment that changes everything financially.
Totally pivotal. Rockefeller basically said, look, this is amazing work. It's based on pure goodwill, one person helping another for free. Therefore,
you don't need much money.
Exactly. He implied little or no money would be required. And the story goes, after he said that, the whole $1 billion worth of capitalists got up and walked out, leaving not a dollar behind them.
Ouch. Just wow. Bill W. must have been devastated at that moment.
Oh, I'm sure he was incredibly frustrated. But later on, he looked back at that night and called it the moment that saved AA from a disastrous course.
How?
If they'd gotten a huge pile of outside money, they could have become just another professional organization.
Yeah.
Bureaucratic, maybe controlled by the donors' agendas. That rejection forced them onto the path of self-support.
Which brings up another money issue. Bill W. himself taking royalties from the big book. That caused a huge uproar, didn't it? People accusing him of profiting from suffering.
Yes, he faced the severest criticism for that. It looked bad, given the emphasis on unpaid, selfless service.
So why did he insist? Why take the royalties?
He argued it was purely practical, essential for the survival and growth of the fellowship, not for personal gain. He pointed out that without those book earnings...
What would have happened?
Well, Dr. Bob and Sister Ignatia, who were doing amazing work setting up early hospital treatment programs in Akron, couldn't have continued. Bill himself would have had to get a regular job, stopping his full-time work for AA. And the central office, the headquarters that was starting to coordinate everything and help new groups start up globally, that couldn't have functioned.
So the royalties were basically funding the essential infrastructure.
That was the argument. It was the only way to keep the core services running and accessible to everyone.
So these two crises, the Rockefeller rejection and the royalty fight, they actually hammered out AA's financial identity, didn't they? Self-support through book sales and small donations from the groups themselves. No big outside funding.
Exactly. Painful lessons, but they defined a core tradition that protected their independence.
Okay, let's shift gears now to the actual engine of personal change. The 12 steps. These aren't just suggestions, are they? They seem designed as a systematic process to kind of take apart the ego and rebuild a person's inner world.
That's a great way to put it. They aim for what the book calls a new state of consciousness. And that systematic internal work really kicks into high gear with the middle steps, steps that deal with honesty and willingness.
Let's take step 5. Admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Why the 3 parts, and especially why tell another person? Can't you just confess to God or write it down?
The sources frame step 5 as fundamentally about ego reduction. The big risk in early recovery, or really any attempt at major change, is trying to do it all secretly, inside your own head, keeping those wrongs, those secrets.
What'd I do?
They act as barriers that separate us from all other human beings. They feed isolation, loneliness, that obsessive self-focus. By actually saying the worst stuff, the exact nature of our wrongs, out loud to another trusted person.
You break that isolation.
You break the isolation, yes. But it's also about humility. It forces you out of your own head, gets you some perspective. It's incredibly humbling. And that's where the ego starts to deflate, starts to lose its grip.
That vulnerability then seems to set the stage for steps 6 and 7, which are about being willing to change and asking for help to change. This is where that old self-reliance really gets challenged.
Absolutely. Remember, the core problem was identified as the misuse of willpower. The person wasn't lacking will, they were experts at using it just destructively,
Yeah.
to get booze, to manipulate, to control. So recovery needs a totally different foundation. They summed it up sometimes with the acronym HOW: honesty, openness, and willingness.
Okay, but what does willingness really mean here? Is it just passively accepting things?
Not passive, no. Willingness, especially in step 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings,
Yeah.
is about actively acknowledging your limits. It's saying, okay, I see these flaws, these patterns, and I realize I can't fix them on my own.
So it's admitting defeat again, in a way.
It is. It's admitting self-will isn't enough. And then it's choosing to align your will with something else, what they often call GOD, meaning good orderly direction, or simply a higher power's will. It's deciding to cooperate rather than fight. That willingness is the surrender of the struggle.
Okay, so after that deep internal work, the focus shifts outwards with steps 8 and 9 making amends, putting the new humility into action.
Right. This is where recovery gets practical, moves out into your relationships and your past actions. Step 8 is making that list everyone you've harmed and becoming willing to make things right. That takes guts.
And then step 9 is actually doing it, making the amends.
Yes, providing restitution where possible. But the key thing here, the sources emphasize, is that this isn't about making you feel better or look good. The purpose is genuinely to repair the damage, to clean up the wreckage of the past.
And step 9 has that really crucial qualification: make direct amends, except when to do so would injure them or others. That's a big ethical boundary.
Huge and incredibly practical. It puts the well-being of the other person ahead of your own need to clear your conscience. So, revealing an old secret affair, for example, might devastate an innocent spouse unnecessarily.
Right, causing new harm.
Exactly. In cases like that, the amends might need to be handled differently, maybe through making amends indirectly or through quiet service or with guidance. The prime directive is do no further harm.
So once the past is addressed as best as possible, step 10 brings it all into the present. Daily inventory. This feels like a principle anyone could use, addiction or not.
It really is. Step 10 is about maintaining emotional sobriety day by day. It's continuing observation and reflection. Basically checking in with yourself throughout the day. Am I getting resentful? Am I fearful? Am I acting out of selfishness?
Spotting the triggers.
Spotting the emotional triggers before they build up and push you back into old destructive patterns. This is where those practical ideas like living one day at a time or focusing on just 24-hour segments come from. It makes life manageable, especially things like anxiety or big projects that feel overwhelming if you look too far ahead.
And then we get to the end goals, steps 11 and 12. Back to the spiritual connection and then, crucially, giving it away.
Step 11 is about deepening that conscious contact with a higher power through prayer and meditation. The idea isn't necessarily formal religion, but more about finding quiet, temporarily setting aside our desire to figure everything out.
Letting go of the need to control and understand everything.
Exactly. Meditation is described really broadly, just any practice that helps quiet the mind, foster emotional balance, and open up that channel to, as they put it, grace, wisdom, and love. It's about cooperation, not dictation.
And the final step, 12, talks about having a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. What does that mean practically?
It's usually described less as a sudden flash of light and more as achieving a new state of consciousness and being, a fundamental shift in how you see yourself, others, and the world.
And this awakening isn't just for personal benefit. It comes with a responsibility.
It demands action. The second part of Step 12 is to carry this message to alcoholics. Service. Just like Bill W. needed Dr. Bob, the ongoing recovery requires giving it away. But, and this is vital, it's done through attraction, not promotion.
Waiting.
You share your own experience, strength, and hope. You offer empathy, you listen, but you don't pressure, you don't sell, you don't force it on anyone. You respect their freedom.
Okay, so the steps are the path for the individual. But for the whole movement to survive, they needed rules for the groups, right? That's where the traditions come in, handling stuff like fame, money, leadership clashes.
Precisely. The traditions are the steps applied to the group. They translate that individual humility into a collective consciousness. And developing them was, again, pretty messy, born from real problems. Take anonymity traditions 11 and 12. It's way more than just good PR.
It seems weird, though. Why not let famous members shout it from the rooftops? Wouldn't that help more people find AA?
That was exactly the debate. You had successful people who'd recovered and wanted to use their name, their personal prestige, to promote AA, break anonymity at the public level.
Sounds logical, maybe.
But the founders saw immense danger in that. It fed the ego, the very thing the steps try to reduce. Anonymity became this crucial shield, a reminder to always place principles before personalities. They worried about AA getting commercialized, used to sell anything and everything, losing its spiritual core. Anonymity protects against ego and exploitation.
And then there's tradition 4, group autonomy, giving local groups almost total freedom.
Ultra liberty, they called it. Basically, any 2 or 3 gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, as long as they don't have some other affiliation. This decentralization is key.
No central command.
No human authority telling groups what they must do. Notice the language in the traditions. It's always, we ought, or our common welfare should come first. Never you must. It ensures the group's conscience is the final authority, not some leader.
And how do they keep the movement from getting ripped apart by arguments over politics, religion, social issues? That seems like a constant risk for any large group. Tradition 10 addresses that, right?
Yes, Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. This came from hard-won experience watching other movements self-destruct over controversies. By staying neutral on politics, different theologies, social debates, they kept the focus absolutely singular.
Which is
Carrying the message to the alcoholic who still suffers, period. Everything else is a distraction that could tear them apart.
Let's touch on one more boundary issue. The scope. Who is AA for? The sources mention debates early on about people addicted to things other than alcohol.
Yes, the other problems dilemma. It's been around practically forever. The working consensus that emerged was pragmatic.
What was it?
People addicted to other substances are welcome in AA, but the primary focus of the meeting, the sharing, should remain on recovery from alcoholism. This keeps the message clear.
What about people dealing with both?
Often, those individuals formed what became known as dual-purpose groups to discuss both issues. But AA's Central Service Office generally doesn't list or formally recognize those, again, to maintain that single, clear purpose for the fellowship as a whole.
And the term disease itself. Was Bill W. fully on board with calling alcoholism a disease in the strict medical sense?
He was actually quite careful about that. He apparently said that technically it's not a disease entity like, say, cancer. More like a complex syndrome, maybe a combination of physical allergy and mental obsession.
So the label wasn't the main point for him.
No, the crucial part was accepting the seriousness of it. The fatal nature of our situation, the devastating weakness. Whether you called it a disease, an illness, a condition, accepting its power over you was the key. Ultimately, they saw it as an obsession-compulsion.
And we talked earlier about this obsession having a spiritual dimension. Can you expand on that again? How do they frame that?
The idea that comes through is that the alcoholic's intense craving, that relentless drive, is actually a kind of misdirected spiritual hunger, a desperate search for the infinite, for transcendence, connection, meaning, wholeness.
But they're trying to satisfy it with something finite.
Exactly. Trying to fill that infinite hole with a material, finite substance like alcohol, it can never work. So the program aims to redirect that striving away from more material things towards the quality of one's spiritual life, which is internal and potentially infinite. The addiction is seen as a spiritual search gone wrong.
Wow. Okay. Looking back over this whole journey, it's quite a story, from just a couple of guys in deep trouble sharing their desperation,
Yeah, feeling completely hopeless.
to building this incredibly resilient, decentralized fellowship, all based on these core ideas of humility, honesty, and service.
And it's fascinating how those early fights over money, over personalities trying to take charge, over how to word things, they weren't just bumps in the road. They were the very things that forged A's character, its core principles, like the traditions.
It really came down to them realizing they couldn't do it alone.
That's the bedrock.
Yeah.
The realization that I am limited and therefore I need others. It shows how achieving real independence, real strength, paradoxically starts by admitting dependence on a higher power, or at the very least on the shared strength and empathy of the group.
So bringing it back to us, to the listener today, even if someone isn't dealing with alcoholism, what's the takeaway from this history, from the way they built this thing?
I think it comes down to accountability and maybe self-redefinition. That whole path they laid out, the steps, it leads towards self-recognition and redefinition. They learned that real power comes from radical internal honesty.
Honesty with yourself first.
Yes. So if the goal is discovering your own truth, figuring out what's my path, what's my real purpose, then you have to ask yourself, How much of our everyday stress, our frustrations at work or in relationships comes from chasing external approval, from trying to get validation from outside?
Instead of cultivating it inside.
Exactly. The big lesson from Bill and Bob and those early pioneers seems to be that the most profound change happens when we stop trying so hard to change the world around us and instead turn inward and commit to changing ourselves. That acceptance of responsibility, that willingness to surrender the illusion of control, that's where the real power starts.